I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
We are in chapter 11 of the book of Daniel this evening. We're going to be getting into a very interesting chapter. A lot of speculation occurs in this chapter because we're going to be talking about kings. We're going to talk about numbers of kings. We're going to talk about kings from different areas of the globe, and people like to know what's being talked about. So let's read the first 4 verses. We'll get one verse each. We'll start with Naomi, go back to Tammy and Bill, over to Henry. Daniel chapter 11, verses 1 to 4.
And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him.
And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the Greeks.
Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will.
And when it has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up, and divided toward the 4 winds of the heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion, with grace to rule. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides his.
I want to check one thing. Yep, I got the right setting. Okay, coming to verse 1, who's speaking? Alright, so we have the man of God or an angel. How'd you come to that conclusion? See, that's what is important for us to remember. Chapters and verses were put in by men. They were not put in by Daniel. And so, if we wanted to know who's talking, we do exactly what Tammy just did. She went to the end of chapter 10, verse 21. But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these, except Michael your prince, also in the first year. It can be very tempting to think that Daniel's speaking here, but he is not. The divine messenger from the previous chapter is speaking to Daniel. What was his message in the first verse?
That he was going to strengthen Darius.
Alright, so in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm him. Is that past tense, present tense, or future tense? Past tense. Because we need to remember, what is the time period? Let's go back to Daniel 10 and get verse 1. We'll come up to Naomi to get that.
In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict. And he understood the word and had understanding of the vision.
Okay, so Darius the Mede, remember when we talked about the fall of Babylon? This is the Darius from Daniel in the Lion's Den. It's not the Darius from Ezra and Nehemiah. It's a different man. And the 3rd year of Cyrus, of course, Cyrus predated Babylon. He ruled over the Medes and Persians before he conquered Babylon. But from Daniel's perspective, when he says the 3rd year of Cyrus, he's not talking about the 3rd actual year of Cyrus's reign. He's talking about the 3rd year since Cyrus captured Babylon. And so we're in the 3rd year of Cyrus, and Darius the Mede has faded off into history. He's probably died by this point. But the man of God here is saying, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Daniel would have known who this Darius the Mede was. And what this angel is doing here is trying to show Daniel that what he's saying about the future is going to be true because of what he's already done. That's how we can trust God. Oftentimes people ask, well, how can I know that God will do what he said in the New Testament? By what he's already done in the Old Testament. He said something, he did it. Whether he promised what he promised was good, or whether he promised what was bad, in the case of Israel. When he said, if you do something, I will do this, and it's good, he did it. He also, when he said something, if you don't do this, I will do this, and it's bad, he also did that too. God is trustworthy. The man of God here is trying to show Daniel he is trustworthy. And so, coming to verse 2, what did the man of God, the angel of God here, tell Daniel? So what would happen after Cyrus?
Three more kings would arise.
Okay, so that's the first thing. We'll deal with these 3 more kings. And one more after that. So there's 4 kings. But we'll deal with the first 3. Anyone, I've looked it up too. Anyone, if we're wanting to count kings, know who the ones who are coming after him are? We know one of them, because he appears in the Bible. In Ezra and Nehemiah's day, who would that be? You remember? I spoke of him a couple minutes ago. No, Cyrus is alive right now. I said he's confused with this Darius the Mede. This Darius the Great, who is the one who's in Ezra and Nehemiah. So when Sanballat and his cohorts, if you go back to Ezra and Nehemiah, they're going to petition Darius to stop the Jews from building the temple. And it's not the Darius of Daniel the Lion's Den, it's Darius the Great. Because we know that the temple was finished around 518 BC. I think that Ezra said it took 18 years or something to build. And so, because the Jews stopped in between. So Darius the Great, he's actually the 3rd king. Cambyses was the one who came right after Cyrus. I can never get the second guy's name right. Let me see. I gotta go get his name. The one, let's see. This is, what is this, Xerxes? So I need to go, predecessor is Darius the Great. The one after him is Bardia. He's the 2nd king. He's the one, the reason why I always forget his name, he reigned for a year. Cambyses, he reigned for a few years, but not many. Cyrus reigned until about 530. Cambyses the second reigned for about 8 years. Then came Bardia. He reigned for a year. And then we had Darius the Great. Darius the Great reigned from 522 BC to 486 BC. So Darius the Great was great. Well, no pun intended. But had a greater reign. But there was a king that came after him that would be greater than him. Anyone know who that was? It's a famous king to history. He's also thought to have been the king in the book of Esther. Can you remember who that is? Pardon me? Xerxes. Xerxes is the one who came after Darius the Great. He was his son. And he reigned from That's not where it is. 486 to 465. And that's why he's generally thought to be the Ahasuerus of the book of Esther, because he falls within that time period. Sometimes you might say Artaxerxes, his son, is the one from the book of Esther. It all depends on when you date the book of Esther as to which one is which. Now, there was something that this fourth king, who would be richer than them all, would do. What was he do? He's going to start a war with Greece. Now, if you know anything about history, Darius the Great was the one who started that war. Unfortunately, he died, leaving his son that war. And the Persians and the Greeks, my brother would be better if he was here at telling you this history, but the Persians and the Greeks fought wars consistently. The Persians wanted to move west, and you'd follow, if you were moving west towards Greece, you would go exactly where the Apostle Paul went, through what is today Turkey. You'd be traveling west, and eventually you'd come to where Turkey meets, it's the Aegean Sea, I think is there. But the Grecian islands are around there too. And the Macedonians were around there. And so this Xerxes was going to stir up all the realm of Greece. That's exactly what history shows us. Daniel is being told this back before Cyrus was even dead. In the days of Cyrus, there's going to be 4 more kings. And that fourth king's going to be richer than them all, and Xerxes was. And he's going to stir up the realm of Greece, and he did. And then verse 3 talks about someone. Who does verse 3 talk about? I'm not looking for a name here specifically yet. All right, so we're going to have a mighty king who's going to rule with great dominion. He's going to do according to his will. Now, I'd like us to note one thing. When Xerxes died, we're still 100 years, about 130 years, or maybe 120 years, to who we suspect this king was. We must make note that it doesn't, the transition from verse 2 to verse 3 doesn't say that in the days of that fourth king, a mighty king would rise. It just says, then a mighty king will rise. It allows for some time to happen there. Artaxerxes, Xerxes' son, doesn't fit the description of verses 3 and 4. However, remember, Xerxes was stirring up the realm of Greece. There is a famous king, who's well known to history, that came from Greece. Remember, Greece is going to be the third kingdom that comes in Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Who is the most famous of the Grecian kings? There's many cities named after him even today. Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was one of the mightiest kings, at least at that time especially, on the planet. His kingdom grew, and it grew quickly, and it grew fast. It was fast. He went all the way east from where the Medes and the Persians were. That kingdom was a spectacular kingdom. But Alexander didn't live to see the peacetime of that kingdom. He died rather young in his time, anyway. And what would happen when this king died, according to Daniel? In verse 4. Sure. His kingdom would be broken up into what? Sure. Would his children be in charge of that? Not according to that at all. No. Remember we had talked about this earlier in Daniel, how there would be a split in the Grecian kingdom. It would be split into 4. I can never get these Greek names right. Lysimachus would be 1. Antipater, Cassander would be 2. Seleucus the first, Nicator, is 3. And Ptolemy the first, Soter, is 4. These 4 kings are not going to be like Alexander. They are going to be weaker. They're not going to have as much territory either. There is going to be bickering among them, but they are not going to be Alexander's children, and they are not. And Alexander's kingdom is going to be uprooted, even others besides these. So in other words, there's going to be a time after Alexander the Great until the Romans come into power widely. It's going to be a lot of unrest. Even in Jerusalem, there's going to be a lot of unrest in Israel. You might say, well, how did Israel wind up under Roman occupation in the days of Jesus? Well, it's the history of the breakup of the Grecian Empire that led to the kingdoms that ruled over Palestine, and then the Romans took over those kingdoms. But it follows exactly the way Daniel was described. Now, some people come along and say, well, Daniel wrote this after, like not Daniel himself, but this was written after the fact. It's so much easier to describe history to prophecy when you write after it had happened. The problem is, the writing of this, the language of this book, of this part of the book, matches the earlier part of the book. Daniel is ascribed to be the writer of this book, and the history that he records about Nebuchadnezzar and others were found to be accurate long before we knew it was accurate. You want to talk about Belshazzar? We didn't find him until I think it was the 1990s. We confirmed that he existed. We all thought Daniel got it wrong. There are details in here that very easy to mistake, to be mistaken of. Remember, they didn't keep records like we keep records. That's why it's so hard for us to find things from the old centuries, because they didn't have the internet. Assuming that the internet remains, people from 100 years from now, 500 years from now, would have access to our records of everything we put on the internet long after we're dead, because we're very good at keeping records. Whereas the people here, they kept records, but unfortunately they were written on stone, written on papyrus that gets lost and decays. I'm not saying that our information will last forever, because it won't, but the records are different. This is prophecy. This was not written after the fact. The accuracy of it, though, is quite amazing. If you're writing this after the fact, you've got to have some pretty good sources to be able to not miscount the kings, because remember, I said that one king, he reigned for a year or less. Very easy to go from Cambyses to Darius because the other king barely reigned. And yet we have that king right. It's very easy to mistake some other things that we're going to see in this chapter as well. The angel here is speaking to Daniel. He's giving him this prophecy. And we can have confidence. Not only that this was prophecy, but we can know from history that it is true. Any comments up to verse 4? I guess I have a couple more things before that, but I'll let you go up and see if there's any comments up to this point. Well, my dad does make a note, and it's an interesting note. In Alexander the Great, is perhaps one of the greatest kings on that this earth has ever known. There are some other notable kings and notable people. But Alexander the Great, we still have cities named after him. Alexandria in Egypt was named after Alexander the Great. And Alexander is still a big figure in history. He gets one verse in the Bible. One. And he's just a time marker to get to the next set of passages. These kings of the north and south, they get much more ink on the paper in Daniel 11 than Alexander the Great does. Just shows you the focus is not on Alexander. If Daniel was wanting to give us a blow-by-blow prophecy of the way all of history will unfold, he would have done that. But remember, this angel is not really concerned about giving Daniel a peek into everything that's going to happen. He's going to want to get to the Messiah. And so he's going to deal with the kingdom that Daniel will know, which is the Persian kingdom. He'll largely skip over the Greeks to get to the fourth kingdom, because it's the fourth kingdom that's going to be important. When we get to verses 8 to 12, a little later, there's going to be a lot of people who want to come along and count kings again, and who's this, and we're going to miss the point. Just like if we focus on verse 3 and everything about Alexander, we're missing the point. It's not about the identity of these kings per se, but it is about getting to Jesus. Some people believe that the prophecy about Greece here in this section being followed by another kingdom that would destroy the temple, or that would bring an end to sacrifice, was actually not talking about Rome. It was talking about the Seleucids under Antiochus Epiphanes. And when we get there, you'll say, well, there is some history that matches this. But we're going to note that Epiphanes didn't destroy the temple. He stopped the sacrifices, didn't destroy the temple. He's not going to be a fulfillment of the prophecies found here. Rome is going to be those fulfillment, and that's what we need to keep in our mind, is that this section is telling us the transition from Greece to Rome. The successors of Alexander the Great, they're going to be called the kings of the east and the kings of the north. But the north and the south will have a series of kings. Daniel's prophecy doesn't give us those names, and he didn't need to know, because he's not going to live to see them. And we don't need to know every king that was going to come. But we're wanting to get to Jesus. Ultimately, one of the kings of the north is going to be the Roman emperor, who will take over from the Seleucids and the Ptolemies and will turn to destroy the temple. Let's continue on with verses 5 to 12. We'll get, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. With 2 verses each, 5 to 12. We'll start with Tammy. Come around to Naomi through verse 12.
Also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes. He shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And at the end of some years they shall join forces, and the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make a treaty. The two shall not retain the power over authority, but neither he nor his authority shall stand. But she shall be given up for those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and who strengthened her in his time.
But from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with Naomi, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them in travail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north.
Also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, and shall return his own land. However, his sons shall stir up strife, and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife.
When the king of the south moved with rage, he shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail.
Okay. Lots of times you want to hear denominational preachers, premillennial preachers, talk about the millennium, the millennial kingdom, the signs of the end times. They're going to come to Daniel 11. Try to make the kingdoms of the south, the kingdoms of the north, the European Union, Russia, maybe China. Like I said, you can get a lot of nations and fit them into geography. Well, they're north, they're south. Remember, we're talking about Daniel. Remember, we've talked about the Greek kingdom. Why is the angel of the Lord here going to go from talking about the Greeks to talking about the Russians of the 21st century, or the European Union of the 21st century? And the answer is he's not. He's just said Alexander's kingdom is going to end. It's going to be divided into 4 parts. So let's continue on with history. The kings of the south and the kings of the north are introduced. The south and north quarters of Alexander's empire. They will replace Alexander and not his sons. Verse 5, we have the king of the south. The king of the south can likely be identified with the Ptolemies in Egypt. And they're going to be a strong, and they're going to be a great power. The Ptolemies, like as far as that's the southern portion of Alexander's kingdom. In later years, there will be a daughter of the king of the south who will make an agreement with the king of the north. And the king of the north can be identified from Daniel's day as the Seleucids in Syria. She's going to be weak. Her father will be weak. Both father and daughter and allies will lose to the king of the north. Now, a lot of people say, well, who is that? And the answer is, I don't know. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because, again, we can get so focused in the weeds that we miss the progression of the story. Verses 7 and 8 says, a descendant of this daughter will finally prevail against the king of the north. He will carry captives to Egypt with great bounty. He will outlive the king of the north. And then verse 9 says, the king of the south attacks the king of the north, but fails and must return home. So we're getting a lot of political intrigue going on here, but no names. Verse 10, the sons of the king of the north will assemble a mighty army and fight to retake the lands of the king of the south had taken from their father's kingdom. Which gets us to 11 and 12, where the king of the south is going to be angry and fight with the king of the north. And at first the south's going to win and kill and capture many. The king of the south becomes proud and in the end does not prevail. You read through history and you can get a better sense of what's being talked about here. I'm not a historian. I don't pretend to be one. But this dynamic here describes the history in Palestine in that time period. It went back and forth. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies went back and forth as to who was powerful, who was not. And that's the sense that we're getting here. Because we're eventually going to get a part of the kings coming who are going to be even further away. They're going to be the Romans. And they're going to be the ones who finally conquer it all. And that's where this angel is leading us to. Remember we talked about the abomination of desolation earlier? Well, we're going to be getting to the Messiah. That's why Daniel's getting this prophecy. It has nothing to do with being a fortune teller or because God thought Daniel deserved to know the way history was going to unfold. Daniel wanted to know about the future kingdom of God. And so that is what the Lord is revealing to him. Let's not get stuck in the weeds trying to figure out which king is which and how this prophecy was fulfilled. We know it was fulfilled. And since God gives us no names, let's not just presume that we have them all.
I'm